The music stopped. 300 of London's elite froze in their tracks. In the centre of the floor stood Sebastian St. Clair, the Duke of Ashworth, blind, scarred, and utterly alone. He had extended his hand, waiting for a dance that society whispered he would never have. The silence was cruel, stretching on for an eternity. The debutantes turned their backs. But then the sound of cheap cotton rustling broke the quiet. A maid gripping a silver tray stepped forward. She placed the tray on the floor, wiped her hands on her apron, and took the Duke's hand. What happened next didn't just shock the ton, it exposed a 20-year-old secret that would bring the British aristocracy to its knees. This is the story of the blind Duke and the maid who saw him. The year was 1884, and the winter in Northumberland was colder than anyone could remember. But the chill outside was nothing compared to the frost inside Ashworth Hall. To the outside world, Sebastian St. To the outside world, Sebastian St. Clair was a tragic figure. He was the 9th Duke of Ashworth, a man who possessed one of the largest fortunes in England, coal mines in the north, shipping lines in Bristol, and an estate that stretched as far as the eye could see. Yet the one thing Sebastian lacked was the ability to see any of it. 10 years prior, Sebastian had been the golden boy of society. Tall with raven black hair and eyes the color of storm clouds, he was a cavalry officer with a reputation for reckless bravery. Then came the fire at the hunting lodge in the Scottish Highlands. The official report claimed it was a fireplace accident. The rumors whispered in the gentlemen's clubs of St. James claimed it was sabotage. Sebastian survived, but the heat had seared his retinas and left a jagged scar running from his left temple down to his jawline. He retreated to Ashworth Hall, locking the gates. He dismissed the majority of the staff, keeping only the essential retainers who knew better than to speak to him. He spent his days in the West Wing Library, running his fingers over Braille manuscripts and playing the violin with a haunting precision that echoed through the empty corridors. He had become a ghost in his own life. "Your Grace," the voice of his butler, Mr. "Your Grace," the voice of his butler, Mr. Henderson cracked the silence of the library. Sebastian didn't turn from the window. He could feel the draft seeping through the glass. "I told you, Henderson. No visitors. Not today. Not ever." "It isn't a visitor, sir. It is the invitation." Sebastian's grip tightened on the head of his cane. The cane was polished ebony, topped with a silver wolf's head, the crest of the St. Clairs. "Burn it." "I cannot, sir. It is from your aunt, the Dowager Countess Beatrice. She insists. It is the Ashworth Winter Ball. It has been 10 years. She says. The estate requires an heir, and you require a wife. Sebastian let out a dry, bitter laugh. "A wife? Henderson, look at me." He turned then, facing the direction of the butler's voice. The scar was stark against his pale skin, his eyes unmoving and milky. Who dances with a monster? Who marries a man who cannot even see her face? The dowager suggests that your title and fortune are compensation enough, Henderson said gently, though the words strung. So I am to be bought, Sebastian sneered. Like a prize horse with a broken leg. The pressure on Sebastian was immense. His cousin, Lord Arthur Penrose, was next in line for the dukedom. Arthur was a gambler, a man who had already mortgaged his own small estate 3 times over. If Sebastian died without a son, Arthur would inherit Ashworth Hall. The tenants would be evicted, the land sold off to pay gambling debts, and the legacy of the St. Clairs would be ash. Sebastian knew this. He hated it, but he knew it. Tell my aunt, Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper, that I will host her damned ball. I will stand in that room. I will offer my hand. And when no one takes it, when they recoil from the blind beast, she will never speak to me of marriage again. It was a gamble. A dark, cynical gamble. Sebastian was counting on the cruelty of society to save him from a loveless marriage. He was certain that their vanity would outweigh their greed. He believed that no high-born lady, no matter how desperate for a title, would humiliate herself by being the wife of the broken duke. He prepared for the ball not with anticipation, but with the grim resolve of a man walking to the gallows. He ordered a new suit tailored from the finest black velvet, not to impress, but to blend into the shadows. He practiced walking the length of the ballroom with Henderson tapping a cane ahead of him, counting the steps. 42 steps to the center. Turn right, bow. He had the mechanics of a duke, but the heart of a recluse. He did not know that while he was counting steps in the ballroom, a pair of eyes was watching him from the shadows of the servants' entrance. Eyes that saw not a monster, but a man in pain. Clara Holloway was not supposed to be in the West Wing. At 22, Clara was the second housemaid, a position that placed her firmly at the bottom of the Ashworth Hall hierarchy, just above the scullery maids who scrubbed the pots. Her world was one of grey soapy water, beeswax polish, and invisibility. Clara was a striking woman, though few noticed beneath the mob cap and the shapeless grey uniform. She had hair the colour of autumn wheat and eyes of a piercing, intelligent blue. But her hands were rough, red from the lye soap, and her demeanour was always submissive, eyes cast down. She had arrived at Ashworth Hall 3 years ago, soaked to the bone in a rainstorm, carrying nothing but a small carpet bag and a letter of recommendation from a vicar in a village that didn't exist on most maps. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, had taken her in out of pity, intending to keep her for a week. But Clara worked harder than 3 men. She mended lace with invisible stitches, she polished silver until it looked like liquid mercury, and she never, ever complained. But Clara had a secret. She wasn't just a maid from nowhere. Late at night, in the tiny attic room she shared with 2 other maids, Clara didn't sleep. She read. She read discarded newspapers she rescued from the trash. She read books she borrowed from the library when the Duke was asleep, returning them before dawn. And she watched the Duke. For 3 years, she had been the invisible force in his life. For 3 years, she had been the invisible force in his life. When Sebastian fell asleep in the library chair, it was Clara who silently crept in to place a blanket over his legs. When he smashed a vase in frustration during one of his dark moods, it was Clara who swept the shards before he could cut his feet, disappearing before he knew she was there. As she knew the rhythm of his sadness. She knew that he played the violin only when it rained. She knew that he touched the scar on his face when he was thinking about the past. On the morning the ball was announced, the servants' hall was in chaos. 300 guests, Mrs. Gable shouted, waving a ladle. We need more beeswax. We need the chandeliers lowered and scrubbed. The silver must be dipped. Clara was assigned to polish the floor of the grand ballroom. It was back-breaking work, on hands and knees, pushing a heavy buffing block across acres of parquet. It was late afternoon. The winter sun was setting early, casting long, orange beams across the floor. Clara was alone in the vast room, humming a tune she remembered from a childhood she tried to forget, a lullaby her father used to sing. Click, tap, click, tap. Clara froze. The sound of the cane. The double doors opened and the Duke entered. He was alone. Usually Henderson was with him, but today Sebastian seemed determined to navigate the space himself. Clara scrambled to her feet, clutching her polishing rag. She pressed herself against the wall, making herself as small as possible. Servants were strictly forbidden from being in the family rooms when the Duke was present. Sebastian walked slowly, counting under his breath. 30. 31. He was moving toward the center of the room. But Clara saw what he couldn't. The maids had moved a heavy velvet settee to the center of the room to clean the rugs beneath it, and they hadn't moved it back yet. Sebastian was walking straight for it. 35. 36. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. If she spoke, she would be fired. Mrs. Gable had been clear, complete invisibility. But if she didn't speak, he would fall. He took another step. His shin was inches from the heavy mahogany frame. Stop! Clara cried out. The word echoed in the empty ballroom like a gunshot. Sebastian froze instantly. He spun around, his cane raised defensively. Who is there? Who is it? Clara trembled. She stepped away from the wall. It's Clara, Your Grace. A maid. Please do not take another step. The settee. It was moved for cleaning. You are about to trip over it. Sebastian lowered the cane slowly, his face hardening into a mask of embarrassment. To be saved by a maid. To have his vulnerability exposed so casually. Why was I not told? He snapped. I do not know, Your Grace. I am sorry. Sebastian stood there, breathing heavily. You are the one who fixes the fire in the library, he said suddenly. Clara blinked. So, I hear you're breathing, Sebastian said, tilting his head slightly. It is distinct. A slight catch when you are nervous. And you smell of lavender soap and old paper. You are the one who puts the blanket on me. Clara's face flushed hot. I didn't want you to be cold, Your Grace. Sebastian was silent for a long moment. He looked terrifying and beautiful all at once in the dying light. You should have let me fall, Clara. It would have been a fitting practice for tomorrow night. Practice for what, sir? For the humiliation, he said bitterly. Tomorrow, I invite all of England to stare at the blind man. I will ask for a dance, and the silence will be deafening. I will trip over my own pride, just as I almost tripped over this settee. Clara looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the fear beneath the anger. And for the first time in 3 years, she broke the rules of her station completely. They won't refuse you because you are blind, Your Grace, she said softly. Sebastian scoffed. Oh, and why will they refuse me then? My sparkling personality. No, Clara said, her voice steady. Because they are afraid of the dark. And you. You have lived in it long enough to master it. That intimidates them. Sebastian stood very still. No one had spoken to him like that in 10 years. Not his aunt, not his doctor, not his butler. Come here, he commanded. Clara hesitated, then walked toward him, the sound of her cheap shoes loud on the polished floor. She stopped a few feet away. Closer. She stepped within arm's reach. Give me your hand. Clara wiped her palm on her aprons and reached out. Her hand was small, rough, and calloused. Sebastian took it. His skin was cool and dry. He ran his thumb over her knuckles, feeling the roughness of her work. As a working hand, he murmured. Honest. Unlike the hands I will hold tomorrow. He paused. Thank you, Clara, for the warning. Now go, before Mrs. Gable finds you here and dismisses you. Clara curtsied, even though he couldn't see it. Good luck tomorrow, Your Grace. She fled the room, her heart pounding. She didn't know that brief encounter would change the trajectory of the ball. She didn't know that Sebastian St. Clair would spend the entire night thinking not of the duchesses and countesses arriving in their carriages, but of the rough hand that smelled of lavender and old paper. And she certainly didn't know that her own past was arriving in one of those carriages. A past that involved a man named Lord Blackwood, a man who thought Clara Halloway was dead. The night of the Ashworth Winter Ball arrived with a vengeance. A blizzard had begun to howl outside the stone walls of the estate, but inside, the great hall was a furnace of light, perfume, and suffocating expectation. 300 guests had braved the snow. They came from the grandest houses in London, from the sprawling estates of Derbyshire, and from the jagged coast of Cornwall. They came in carriages lined with fur, their necks dripping with diamonds and their minds sharpened with malice. They had not come to celebrate the Duke's return to society, they had come to witness a spectacle. They wanted to see if the beast of Ashworth was as broken as the rumours claimed. In the servants' quarters, the atmosphere was frantic. Clara was assigned to the cloakroom, taking heavy wool coats and wet furs from the guests. It was a lowly station, but it gave her a vantage point. She watched them enter, men with mutton-chop whiskers and swelling paunches, women in silks of emerald, crimson, and sapphire, their fans fluttering like the wings of nervous birds. She watched them enter, men with mutton-chop whiskers and swelling paunches, women in silks of emerald, crimson, and sapphire, their fans fluttering like the wings of nervous birds. Among the arrivals, one man stood out. He was tall, with slicked-back blonde hair, and a face that would have been handsome if not for the permanent sneer etched into his features. Lord Silas Blackwood. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She ducked behind a rack of fox fur coats, her breath catching in her throat. Silas Blackwood was a man from a life she had buried 3 years ago. He was a predator in a silk waistcoat, a man who collected secrets and destroyed reputations for sport. Seeing him here in Northumberland was a nightmare made manifest. "Girl," a sharp voice snapped. "Take my wrap, are you deaf?" Clara flinched and hurried to take the ermine stole from a haughty marchioness, keeping her head low, her cap pulled down. Blackwood passed by her, mere inches away. He smelled of brandy and expensive tobacco, a scent that triggered a wave of nausea in Clara's stomach. He didn't look at her. To men like Blackwood, servants were furniture. Upstairs in the master suite, Sebastian stood before a full-length mirror he could not use. "The cravat is straight, Your Grace," Henderson said, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion. "You look imposing." "Imposing," Sebastian repeated flatly. A polite word for terrifying. He wore all black, a stark contrast to the colorful peacocks downstairs. His only ornamentation was the star of the garter pinned to his chest and a black silk ribbon tied across his eyes. He had refused the dark glasses his doctor suggested. If they were to stare, let them stare at the ribbon that marked his darkness. "It is time," Henderson said. Sebastian gripped his cane. "Let us get this over with." The entrance of the Duke was theatrical by design. The orchestra, perched on the balcony, struck a commanding chord. The double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. "His Grace the Duke of Ashworth," the herald announced. Conversation died instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against the eardrums. Sebastian stood at the top of the stairs, alone. Henderson had stepped back. Sebastian had to descend the 20 marble steps unaided. He counted. 1, 2. Right hand on the rails. 3. Below, the crowd watched with morbid fascination. They were waiting for a slip, a stumble, a sign of weakness. Lady Genevieve loosely held her fan, whispering to her mother, "Look at the scar. It's worse than I heard. How can one look at that across a breakfast table?" "Hush," her mother hissed, though her eyes were wide with a mix of pity and revulsion. Sebastian moved with a fluid, lethal grace. He didn't stumble. He reached the bottom of the stairs and bowed perfectly to the room he couldn't see. A ripple of polite, scattered applause broke out, quickly dying down. His aunt, the Dowager Countess Beatrice, bustled forward. She was a small, formidable woman who loved Sebastian, but loved the family reputation more. "Sebastian," she whispered urgently, gripping his elbow. "You must circulate. Lord Penrose is here, looking smug. You must prove you are capable. Dance. Find a wife. A wife, aunt." Sebastian's voice was low. "Look at them. They part like the Red Sea when I approach." It was true. As Sebastian moved through the room, a bubble of empty space moved with him. Men greeted him with overly loud, hearty voices, uncomfortable with his blindness. Women curtsied and quickly turned away, terrified he might ask them to converse. The hour grew late. The orchestra began to tune their instruments for the partners' waltz, the highlight of the evening, where gentlemen were expected to choose a lady they favored. This was the moment Sebastian had dreaded. This was the test. He walked to the center of the ballroom floor. The crowd pressed against the walls, leaving the center empty. The musicians waited, bows hovering over strings. Sebastian raised his hand. "I request the honor of a dance," he announced, his voice carrying to the rafters. He turned slowly, his hand extended into the void. He didn't aim it at anyone specific. That would be too cruel to the lady. He simply offered it to the room. Is there no lady who will join her host? The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. It was agonizing. Mothers gripped their daughters' arms, holding them back. The young debutantes looked at the floor, at their fans, anywhere, but at the blind man with the scarred face, standing alone in the center of the vast, polished floor. Lord Silas Blackwood, standing near the punch bowl, let out a short, derisive laugh. It wasn't loud, but in the quiet it was unmistakable. "Go on then," he muttered to his companions. "Someone take the poor cripple's hand. It's charity, isn't it?" Sebastian heard the laugh. He heard the rustle of silk moving away from him. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his face remained like stone. He had been right. They were monsters. He began to lower his hand. The humiliation was complete. He would retreat to the library, lock the doors, and never come out again. The Ashworth line would end with him. Just drop your hand, he told himself. End it. But his hand didn't drop. Because someone had taken it. The gasp that went through the room sucked the air out of the ballroom. It wasn't a gloved hand of kidskin or silk. It was a bare hand. Rough, warm, and trembling slightly. Sebastian froze. He knew that touch. He knew the callus on the thumb. He knew the scent that suddenly cut through the heavy perfumes of the court, lavender soap and old paper. Clara Holloway stood in the center of the ballroom, illuminated by the 1,000 candles of the crystal chandeliers. She had abandoned her post at the cloakroom. She had walked past the stunned footmen, past the horrified dowagers, and onto the sacred parquet of the dance floor. She was wearing her grey servant's dress, patched at the elbow. Her white apron was stained with a spot of tea. Her hair was tucked under a plain mob cap. Amidst the sea of diamonds and satin, she looked like a sparrow standing among peacocks. But her head was high. Her blue eyes were blazing with a fierce, protective fire. "I believe this dance is mine, Your Grace," she said clearly. The shock was absolute. A maid, touching a duke, in public. It was social suicide. It was anarchy. Clara, Sebastian hissed, his voice barely audible. "What are you doing? They will destroy you. Let go." "No," she whispered back, her fingers tightening around his. "You asked for a dance. I am accepting. You are a servant. This is not done." "Then let us make it done," she said. "Or are you afraid to dance with a maid, Sebastian?" She used his name, not his title. Sebastian felt a jolt go through his spine. He realized then that she wasn't just saving him from humiliation. She was challenging him to be the man she believed he was. He made a decision. He squeezed her hand. "I am afraid of nothing, Clara." He raised his voice, addressing the orchestra leader who was staring with his mouth open. "Maestro, a waltz. The Blue Danube. No." The conductor, terrified of disobeying a direct order from the Duke, tapped his baton frantically. The music swelled, a slow, rhythmic, sweeping melody. Sebastian placed his right hand on Clara's waist. He felt the coarse wool of her dress, so different from the silk he was used to. He pulled her close, shockingly close for polite society. "Count with me," he whispered. "A 1, 2, 3. They began to move. At first, the crowd was paralyzed with horror. But as the couple moved, the horror turned to confusion, and then to a reluctant awe. Sebastian danced with the memory of a cavalry officer. He was strong, sure-footed, leading her with subtle shifts of his weight. And Clara floated. She followed his lead with an intuitive grace, matching his long strides, her grey skirt swirling around his velvet legs. They spun around the room, a black and grey blur. Everyone is staring, Sebastian murmured as they turned. Let them stare, Clara said, her eyes locked on the ribbon across his face. They are staring because they have never seen anything real before. You will be dismissed, Sebastian warned. Mrs. Gable will throw you out in the snow tonight. Then I will leave, Clara said. But I could not stand there and watch them break you. You are worth 10 of them, Sebastian. For the first time in 10 years, Sebastian felt a warmth bloom in his chest that had nothing to do with the fireplace. He felt seen. The blind man was the only one who really saw the woman in his arms, and the maid was the only one who saw the Duke's soul. As they spun past the breathless onlookers, the sheer romance of the moment began to crack the cynicism of the crowd. It was scandalous, yes, but it was also undeniably beautiful. The blind Duke and the maid. It was like a fairy tale come to life. But not everyone was enchanted. Lord Silas Blackwood narrowed his eyes. He stepped closer to the edge of the dance floor, tracking the maid as she whirled past. He knew that face. It wasn't the face of a maid named Clara. He had seen that face 3 years ago in a courtroom in London, weeping as a judge hammered a gavel. Impossible, Blackwood muttered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a monocle, fixing it to his eye. He waited for them to spin again. The light caught Clara's profile. The arch of her nose. The specific, stubborn set of her jaw. Blackwood smiled, a cold, predatory expression. Lady Catherine Sterling, he whispered to himself. The missing heiress. The girl who supposedly drowned in the Thames. The music reached a crescendo. Sebastian spun Clara one final time, and they came to a halt in the center of the room. He didn't let her go immediately. The girl who supposedly drowned in the Thames. The music reached a crescendo. Sebastian spun Clara one final time, and they came to a halt in the center of the room. He didn't let her go immediately. He held the pose, his chest heaving slightly, his hand firm on her waist. For a moment, there was silence again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of stunned reverence. Then a single person started clapping. It was Lord Arthur Penrose, Sebastian's wastrel cousin. He was drunk, grinning, and seemingly delighted by the chaos his cousin had caused. Bravo, Arthur shouted. The tension broke. A few others clapped, unsure of the protocol. Sebastian bowed to Clara, low and respectful, as if she were a princess of the blood. Thank you, my lady, he said loud enough for the room to hear. Clara curtsied, her knees shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Sebastian, she whispered, I must go. She broke away from him, turning to run back to the anonymity of the servants' hall. She needed to vanish before the spell broke completely, and the anger of the upper class descended on her. She hurried toward the service door, but a hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. A strong, manicured hand. "Not so fast, my dear," a voice sneered. Clara froze. She looked up into the cold, pale eyes of Lord Sealer's Blackwood. "Let me go, sir," Clara gasped, trying to pull her arm back. "I think not," Blackwood said, his voice raising so the nearby guests could hear. "I don't believe we have been properly introduced. Or perhaps reintroduced." The music had stopped. The crowd turned their attention to the commotion near the door. Sebastian, sensing the shift in the room's energy, turned his head sharply. "Henderson, what is happening?" "It is Lord Blackwood, Your Grace," Henderson said, his voice alarmed. "He has hold of the girl." Sebastian's face darkened. He began to stride toward the sound of the voices, his cane tapping furiously. "Let her go, Blackwood." Sebastian roared. "I am merely doing my civic duty, Ashworth." Blackwood shouted back, tightening his grip on Clara's bruising wrist. He looked around the room, savoring the moment. "You all think this is a charming little romance. The Duke and the scullery maid." He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He yanked Clara forward, ripping the sleeve of her dress. "This is no maid," Blackwood announced, his eyes gleaming with malice. "This is Lady Catherine Sterling, the daughter of the disgraced Earl of Dumfries, and she is wanted by the Crown for the murder of her betrothed." A collective gasp, louder than before, tore through the room. Clara Catherine went pale. The secret she had guarded for 3 years, the reason she had hidden in the bleakest corners of Northumberland, was out. "No," she whispered. "I didn't do it. It was an accident. You know it was an accident." "The law calls it murder, my dear," Blackwood hissed. "And there is a bounty of £5,000 on your pretty head." Sebastian reached them. He couldn't see Blackwood, but he could hear the fear in Clara's breaths. "Are you harboring a criminal?" "I am harboring the woman who just saved this family's dignity," Sebastian said. "Which is more than I can say for you. She killed a man. I killed no one." Clara cried out, tears finally spilling over. "He attacked me. I was defending myself." "A likely story," Blackwood mocked. "Constable is the local magistrate here. I want this woman in irons immediately." The ballroom descended into chaos. The romantic dream had shattered into a nightmare of accusations and law. Sebastian stood between Clara and the crowd, a blind shield, but he knew that even a duke could not fight the law if she was truly wanted for murder. He reached back, finding Clara's hand behind him. "Is it true?" he asked softly amidst the shouting. "Are you Lady Catherine?" "Yes," she sobbed. "But I am innocent, Sebastian. I swear it." Sebastian tightened his grip. "Then that is all I need to know." The breakdown of the Ashworth Winter Ball was absolute. What had begun as a fairy tale had disintegrated into a sordid spectacle of police whistles and hysterical gossip. 2 constables, summoned by Lord Blackwood's urgent dispatch earlier that evening, had arrived at the hall. They were rough men, intimidated by the grandeur of the house, but emboldened by the warrant they carried. Lady Catherine Sterling, the senior constable, intoned, clamping heavy iron cuffs onto Clara's wrists. The metal bit into her skin, chafing the raw red scrub marks of her daily labor. "You are under arrest for the murder of Lord Reginald Croft." "I did not kill him," Clara screamed, struggling as they dragged her toward the door. Her eyes sought Sebastian in the crowd. "Sebastian, I only fought him off. He was alive when I left." Sebastian lunged forward, his cane clattering to the floor. "Hold he!" roared, his voice cracking with a desperation his staff had never heard. "She is under my protection. You will not take her like a common thief, Mr. Henderson and 2 footmen had to physically restrain the Duke. "Your Grace, you cannot," Henderson whispered urgently, tears in his eyes. "If you strike an officer of the Crown, you will be stripped of your title. You will be powerless to help her." The logic pierced through Sebastian's rage. He stopped fighting, his chest heaving, his blind eyes staring wildly in the direction of Clara's voice. "I will come for you," Sebastian shouted over the din of the crowd. "Do not say a word to them, Catherine. I will burn London to the ground before I let you hang." The heavy oak doors slammed shut, sealing Clara's fate. The ballroom fell into a suffocating silence. The guests, who had watched the drama with bated breath, now looked at their host with a mixture of pity and disdain. The blind Duke had fallen in love with a murderess. It was the scandal of the century. Sebastian straightened his jacket. He turned to the room, his face a mask of icy fury. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. No one moved. "Get out," he screamed, the sound echoing off the painted ceiling. "All of you. Get out of my house." The scramble was immediate. Duchesses gathered their skirts, and lords grabbed their coats. Within 20 minutes, Ashworth Hall was empty, save for the servants who moved like ghosts, extinguishing the candles that had illuminated the disastrous night. 2 hours later, Sebastian sat in the back of his carriage, wrapped in a heavy fur coat, as it rumbled toward the county jail. He refused to wait until morning. The jail was a medieval nightmare, a stone pit that smelled of mildew, unwashed bodies, and despair. The turnkey, a man named Mr. Grubbs, was shaking as he led the Duke down the spiral stairs. He had never had a peer of the realm in his dungeon, let alone one as terrifying as the Duke of Ashworth. "She's in the secure cell, Your Grace," Grubbs stammered. "Kept her away from the general rabble, I did." "Out of respect, open it," Sebastian commanded. "And leave us." The heavy iron door creaked open. Sebastian stepped into the damp darkness. He heard the rustle of straw in the corner. "Sebastian," the voice was small, broken. He fell to his knees in the filth, discarding his cane. He reached out, his hands sweeping the air until he found her shoulders. He pulled her into him, burying his face in her neck. She was shivering violently. "I am here," he murmured, stroking her hair. I am here. They say I will hang, Clara sobbed, clinging to his velvet lapels. Blackwood. He says he has witnesses. But it's a lie. It's all a lie, tell me. Sebastian said, holding her face in his hands. Tell me everything. I cannot fight the darkness unless I know the shape of it. Clara took a shuddering breath. My father, the Earl, lost everything gambling. To save his debts, he sold me. He betrothed me to Lord Reginald Croft. Croft was... He was a monster, Sebastian. He liked pain. On the night of the engagement party, he cornered me in the library. He tried to force himself on me. Sebastian's grip tightened, his knuckles turning white. I fought him, she continued. I grabbed a heavy brass statue from the desk. I struck him. Once. He fell back and hit his head on the hearth. There was blood. So much blood. But he was breathing. I swear, Sebastian, he was groaning when I climbed out the window. I ran. I changed my name. I walked for weeks until I reached the north. I thought he would send men after me to drag me back to the altar. I didn't know he had died until tonight. Lord Croft, Sebastian mused, his mind working furiously. A man of immense wealth. And Blackwood. Blackwood was Croft's partner, Clara said. They owned shipping lanes together. Illegal ones, people whispered. Opium. Blackwood was there that night. He was in the hall. He must have seen me run. Sebastian sat back on his heels, the cold damp seeping into his knees, but he felt nothing but the heat of calculation. If you struck him and he was still breathing, Sebastian said slowly, then a single blow from a girl did not kill a man the size of Croft. Not immediately. What are you saying? I am saying, Sebastian whispered, a dark realization dawning on him that you provided the perfect opportunity. You struck him and ran. You left a stunned, wealthy man alone in a room with a business partner who stood to inherit everything if the partnership dissolved. Clara gasped. You think Blackwood finished him? I think, Sebastian said, standing up and pulling her up with him, that Lord Blackwood has been hunting you not to bring you to justice, but to silence the only person who can prove he was at the scene. He doesn't want you in prison, Catherine. He wants you dead. The sound of heavy boots on the stairs interrupted them. Time's up, Your Grace, the turnkey called out nervously. Sebastian kissed her forehead. It was a kiss of promise, not just affection. They will move you to London for the trial in 3 days. I will be on the train before you. I will hire the finest defense in England. And I will destroy Silas Blackwood, even if I have to tear down the house of Lords stone by stone to do it. Sebastian, she whispered, her hand lingering on his chest. I am just a maid to them. No one will believe us. Sebastian turned back his scarred face caught in the flicker of the torchlight. "Then let them look at me," he said. "They already think I am a monster. It is time I showed them what a monster can do." The London townhouse of the St. Clair family had been shuttered for a decade. When Sebastian's carriage arrived, accompanied by a retinue of servants he had summoned from the country, the neighbors in Grosvenor Square peered through their curtains in shock. Dust sheets were ripped from furniture, fires were lit in the grates, and the sleeping giant of Ashworth House awoke. Sebastian did not rest. He turned the library into a war room. He summoned Mr. Finch, a solicitor known for his ruthless intellect and lack of scruples. Finch was a small, weasel-like man who smelled of ink and peppermints, but he was the best legal mind in the city. "It is a grim case, Your Grace," Finch said, shuffling papers on the desk while Sebastian paced the room, counting his steps. Lady Catherine was found fleeing the scene. "The weapon has her prints. The weapon has her prints. Lord Blackwood has sworn an affidavit that he entered the room moments after she left and found Lord Croft dead. The coroner's report cites blunt force trauma to the cranium." "Read the report again," Sebastian commanded. "And every word." Slowly. Finch sighed but complied. "Deceased found at 11:00 p.m. Cause of death, cranial fracture. Note, deceased also had bruising on the throat and Sebastian stopped pacing. "And traces of discoloration on the lips." The coroner noted it as potential asphyxiation or perhaps a reaction to wine, but deemed the head wound the primary cause. "Discoloration," Sebastian murmured. He tapped his cane rhythmically. "Croft was a heavy drinker." "Notorious," Finch replied. "And Blackwood, a gambler, and deep in debt despite his shipping interests." Sebastian walked to the window. He couldn't see the foggy London street, but he could hear the city, the chaos, the noise, the layers of deceit. "We need to find the valet," Sebastian said suddenly. "The valet. Croft's valet. A man like Croft does not dress himself. A man like Croft does not die without his servants knowing the secrets of the house. Where is he?" Finch checked his notes. "Dismissed by Lord Blackwood the day after the murder. Current whereabouts unknown." "Find him," Sebastian ordered. "Use the Ashworth accounts. Bribe every gin shop owner and boarding house landlady in the East End. I want that valet in this room by tomorrow night." While Finch hunted for the witness, Sebastian waged a different kind of war. He knew he could not simply rely on the law. He needed to shake Blackwood's confidence. He needed to make the villain make a mistake. He decided to attend the Gentlemen's Club where Blackwood held court, White's on St. James's Street. When Sebastian entered White's, the room went silent just as the ballroom had. He walked with Henderson, who guided him to a leather armchair near the fire. Sebastian ordered a brandy and sat, his blind eyes fixed on the middle distance, looking utterly relaxed. He knew Blackwood was there. He could smell the specific, cloying tobacco he smoked. Ashworth, Blackwood's voice came from the left, dripping with mock sympathy. Brave of you to show your face. I hear your little maid is enjoying the hospitality of Newgate Prison. Sebastian took a sip of brandy. He didn't turn his head. She is comfortable enough, Blackwood. My solicitors assure me the trial will be illuminating. Illuminating. Blackwood laughed nervously. It's an open and shut case. She bashed his brains in. Did she? Sebastian asked softly. Curious. My experts seem to think the blow she struck was non-fatal. They are very interested in the bruising on the neck. And the poison. It was a bluff. A massive, dangerous bluff. The coroner hadn't mentioned poison, only discoloration. There was a silence. A long, heavy silence. Sebastian heard Blackwood's breathing hitch. He heard the ice in Blackwood's glass clink as his hand trembled. Poison. Blackwood squeaked. That's absurd. Is it? Sebastian smiled, a cold, shark-like smile. We exhume the body tomorrow. I have to go, Blackwood stammered. I have an appointment. Sebastian listened to Blackwood's hurried footsteps retreating from the club. Henderson, Sebastian whispered. Yes, Your Grace. He is terrified. Have a man follow him. Tonight. He will lead us to something. The trial of Lady Catherine Sterling began 2 days later at the Old Bailey. The gallery was packed. The press had whipped the public into a frenzy about the murderous maid and her blind savior. Clara stood in the dock, looking pale and thin, but she held her head high. When she saw Sebastian enter the courtroom, guided by Henderson to a seat behind the defense bench, her shoulders relaxed slightly. The Crown prosecutor was brutal. He painted Clara as a manipulative gold digger who seduced a duke to hide from her crimes. He called witness after witness who testified to her flight from London. Then came the star witness, Lord Sealer's Blackwood. Blackwood took the stand, looking confident again. He had clearly recovered from Sebastian's bluff, realizing that no exhumation order had been public. Tell us what you saw, Lord Blackwood, the prosecutor asked. I heard a scream, Blackwood lied smoothly. I ran to the library. I saw Lady Catherine standing over Lord Croft with a heavy statue. She looked at me with wild eyes and fled through the window. I checked Croft's pulse. He was dead. And you are certain he was dead? Quite certain. His skull was crushed. Thank you, Lord Blackwood. Mr. Finch stood up for the defense. He looked nervous. He adjusted his wig. Lord Blackwood, Finch began. You were business partners with the deceased, correct? I was. And upon his death, you inherited the controlling share of the Croft Shipping Company. That was the agreement, yes. A convenient death, then. Objection. The prosecutor roared. Withdrawn, Finch muttered. No further questions. The crowd murmured. It was going badly. Finch hadn't landed a blow. Blackwood smirked as he stepped down. Call the next witness, the judge ordered. Sebastian stood up. The defense calls His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth, Finch announced. A ripple of shock went through the room. A duke testifying. Sebastian took the stand. He looked magnificent and tragic, his scar visible, his blind eyes scanning the room. Your Grace, Finch said. You were not present at the murder. Why are you here? I am here to give evidence regarding the character of the accused, Sebastian said, his voice deep and resonant. And to introduce a piece of evidence that has just arrived. Sebastian reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small, leather-bound book. Blackwood, sitting in the gallery, went rigid. Last night, Sebastian continued, my men located Lord Croft's former valet, a Mr. Thomas Higgins, living in squalor in Whitecapel. Mr. Higgins was afraid to speak for fear of his life. But he sold us this. Lord Croft's personal ledger. Sebastian held up the book. I cannot read it, Sebastian said, but my solicitor tells me it details certain payments. Payments made to Lord Blackwood. Payments for silence regarding the smuggling of opium. This is outrageous, Blackwood shouted from the gallery, jumping to his feet. He is lying. The blind fool can't see anything. I may not see, Sebastian thundered, turning his head unerringly toward Blackwood's voice. But I hear everything, Blackwood. I hear the rattle of debt in your voice. And I hear the fear of a man who strangled his partner after a girl knocked him unconscious. Order! Order! The judge banged his gavel. I have the valet, Sebastian shouted over the noise. He is outside. He saw you enter the room after Lady Catherine left. He saw you pour the wine. He saw you squeeze the life out of a man who was only dazed. It was the second bluff, but it was grounded in the truth Sebastian had pieced together. He didn't have the valet outside. Higgins had fled again. But Blackwood didn't know that. Panic seized Blackwood. He looked at the doors. He looked at the judge. And then he made the mistake of a guilty man. He ran. Stop him, the bailiff shouted. Blackwood shoved a woman aside and bolted for the exit. But he wasn't fast enough. Two burly men, Sebastian's coal miners from the north who had come down for the trial, blocked the door. They grabbed the Lord and threw him to the floor. The courtroom erupted. Sebastian stood still in the witness box, gripping the rail. He couldn't see the chaos, but he felt the shift in the air. The truth was out. Not by law, but by fear. He turned his face toward the prisoner's dock. Catherine, he called out softly amidst the noise. I'm here, she wept. I'm here, Sebastian. The chaos in the Old Bailey settled into a grim formality. Lord Sealer's Blackwood, pinned to the floor by the Ashworth miners, was shouting obscenities, but his flight had been a confession in itself. The ledger Sebastian held was handed to the judge. It didn't matter that the valet wasn't actually outside. The ledger contained enough damning evidence of embezzlement and illegal smuggling to destroy Blackwood's credibility forever. Under subsequent interrogation, Blackwood would crack, admitting to suffocating his partner to seize the shipping empire, using Clara's blow as the perfect cover. The gavel banged. Case dismissed against Lady Catherine Sterling. Immediate release ordered. He only heard the sound of the dock gate opening and the rush of footsteps. Clara didn't care about propriety. She ran across the courtroom floor and threw herself into Sebastian's arms. He caught her, stumbling back slightly, burying his face in her hair. They stood there, the Duke and the vindicated lady, holding each other as the flashbulbs of the early press photographers popped like fireworks. The return to Ashworth Hall was not a retreat, it was a victory march. The snow had melted, revealing the first green shoots of spring on the moors. The staff, who had once walked on eggshells, now lined the driveway to welcome them home. Mrs. Gable was weeping openly, clutching a handkerchief. Henderson stood at the door, a rare smile cracking his stoic face. But Sebastian and Clara didn't stay in the main hall. They walked out to the garden, to the stone bench near the fountain where Sebastian used to sit alone for hours. "It is over," Clara said, taking his hand. "You did it, Sebastian. You saved me. We saved each other." Sebastian corrected her. He turned his face to the sun, feeling its warmth. "Do you know what I was thinking that night in the ballroom? Before you stepped forward. That you were alone. That I was finished." He admitted that the darkness had finally won. I was going to sell the estate. I was going to fade away. He squeezed her hand. "But then you touched me. And for the first time since the fire, I didn't feel the scar. I just felt possibility." Clara reached up and touched the scar that ran down his cheek. "It is not a mark of a monster, Sebastian. It is a mark of a survivor. And it is the face I love." Sebastian went still. "Love. You are a lady now, Catherine. You can return to London. You can reclaim your life. You don't need to be the nursemaid to a blind recluse." "I am not Catherine," she said firmly. "I mean I am. But I am also Clara. I am the woman who polished your floors and read your books. And I don't want London's. I want this. I want the smell of the moors and the library and you." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. Unless the Duke does not wish to marry a woman who has spent the last 3 years scrubbing his toilets." Sebastian laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that startled a flock of pigeons from the roof. "Marry?" he asked. "I intend to do more than marry you, Clara. I intend to worship you. I intend to fill this house with so much life and noise that the silence never dares to return." He dropped to one knee on the damp grass. "Lady Catherine Sterling. Clara." Will you do me the extraordinary honor of being my Duchess? Will you be my eyes, my heart, and my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "1,000 times yes." They married a month later in the small chapel on the estate. It wasn't the stiff, formal affair the dowager aunt had wanted. It was a celebration. The miners came, the maids came, and the tenants came. Years later, legend says that if you visited Ashworth Hall, you wouldn't find a sad, dark place. You would find a home filled with music. You would see a duke who walked without a cane, his hand resting lightly on the shoulder of a beautiful woman with laughing blue eyes. And they say that every year at the winter ball, the floor would clear for the first dance. The music would start, the blue Danube, and the duke and his duchess would spin, perfectly in sync, proving to the world that love isn't about what you see with your eyes, but what you feel with your soul. The blind duke had found his vision, and the maid had found her crown. And that is the incredible, true-to-life romance of the blind duke and the maid who saved him. It's a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take someone's hand when the rest of the world has turned away. Sebastian and Clara proved that love sees past scars, past status, and even past the darkness itself. If this story moved you, or if you believe in a love that breaks all the rules, please give this video a like. It really helps us share these stories with more people. Don't forget to share this with a friend who loves a good romance, and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a saga of love, betrayal, and redemption. What do you think? Would you have stepped forward to dance with the Duke? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.